Hey, welcome to the Curious Native Podcast. I'm your host, Huna Smakathian, and in today's episode of the Curious Native Podcast, we'll be taking a look at a very important Indigenous woman and her life and legacy when it comes down to Indigenous rights activism. So, we will be taking I'm trying to think of the right words. I will be taking my time with this episode, and specifically, not that I haven't taken time with my other episodes, but I'm going to be taking an extra special care because, one, this person is still alive, so there's a chance she could hear this episode, and I would not want to be, spreading any false information, so I did make sure that my research was in top shape. Also, because she has been, as recently, been receiving harassment from specific people amongst journalist circles and indigenous communities online. So I didn't want to feel any of that. So I was very careful on what I am including in this episode. Not that I am withholding any information about her. It's just there's just no need to mention other things like I know a lot of people like to use the fact that she was adopted by white people as an pretend Indian. I'm being very careful with this episode, and I just don't want to add to anything like that. So, Also, I did want to say that this is the third episode in my Indigenous Icons series on the Curious Native Podcast, as well as the 12th episode, period, on the Curious Native Podcast. So, I did say I was doing 20 episodes for this season, but I actually might extend it to 30. It just depends on how I'm feeling. I've already surpassed 10, because I was saying originally that on the 4th, I think it was on the 5th episode maybe, I was talking about maybe wanting to take a break by the 10th episode and then coming back to do the other 10. But no, I kept it rolling. I'm already on the 12th episode. So, with all that being said, let's get into it. So, who is Buffy Sainte-Marie? Buffy Sainte-Marie is an Indigenous Canadian-American woman from the Piapot Cree Nation. She is a social activist, educator, singer-songwriter, visual artist, and composer. Buffy Sainte-Marie was born in 1941 on the Piapot 75 Reserve in the, for my mispronunciations of any words, but Quapaw Valley in Saskatchewan, Canada, to Cree parents. At the age of 2, she was taken from her parents as a part of the 60s Scoop, which, for those who do not know, the 60s Scoop was a period in which a period in Canada in which a series of policies and laws and codes were enacted in Canada that enabled welfare and authorities to take and quote-unquote scoop up, that's where that comes from, Indigenous children from their families and place them with foster homes and foster parents till adopted out by white families. And I know the name is the 60s Scoop, but this really got to start back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and persisted into the 80s. With that being said, Buffy Sainte-Marie was adopted by an American couple, Albert and Winifred Sainte-Marie, from Wakefield, Massachusetts. She also went to university in Wakefield, Massachusetts, and graduated at the top 10 of her class, so, that's cool. But in 1964, on a return trip to the Piapot Reserve in Canada, for a powwow. While there, she was welcomed and adopted in by the youngest son of Chief Piapot, Emile Piapot, and his wife, Clara Piapot. So, she did have connection to, her community and her people. So that is nice that she was able to reconnect on later in her return trip. And, that she was accepted and adopted in sense of, in the Cree senses. So now that you know who she is and what she, where she is from, I did want to take a moment to take a look at her career in activism. So let's just get like right into it. In 1963, after recovering from a throat infection, Buffy Sainte-Marie became addicted to codeine, and her recovery from that experience, which, I could only imagine. I have, my family, multiple family members struggle with addiction and alcoholism, so that, that whole, that, I just understand that, drug addiction and, any forms of addiction could be hard, so her recovering from that is just, that's something I could sympathize with and empathize with. Her recovery from that experience is what became the basis and the inspiration for her song Codeine. Also in 1963, she witnessed wounded soldiers coming back from the Vietnam War, which at this time in American history, the United States government was officially denying it any involvement within the Vietnam War. And so, her making a song about it and speaking up, that was a big thing. And, that was a big deal. And it definitely played on, into her life when it comes down to, like being blacklisted and stuff, which I will be talking about in a little bit. I don't know if I said the name, but the song that it inspired, it did inspire a song. Let's see, what's it? My notes are so mixed up. I am so sorry. Her witnessing wounded soldiers coming back from the Vietnam War is what inspired her song Universal Soldier, released on her debut album in 1964. So, that's cool. A lot of her music, especially when it comes down to her music, there was a lot of activism and protest that comes down to it, which is, she was one of the biggest musical activists of the 60s and 70s and 80s and even of today. She has a big legacy. But Buffy Sainte-Marie is known for her, she also has made other huge strides for Indigenous communities. Like in 1996, for example, Buffy started a philanthropic nonprofit fund, Native Foundation for American Indian Education, devoted to improving Native American students' participation in education. Jesus, I need some education. As you can see, I'm messing up so many words. For anybody curious, like I said, I don't speak any Cree languages, but Neowin, from my understanding, it basically means be true to your culture. So, I could get down with that. I did mention earlier, like a few minutes ago, about, blacklisting. Sainte-Marie said in a 2008 interview at the National Museum of the American Indian that she had been blacklisted by American radio stations and that she and other Native Americans and other Indigenous people in the Red Power movements were pushed out of the industry during the 1970s. And in a 1999 interview at Jesus Christ. Please forgive me. It is 4 o'clock in the morning. And I am, for the last, I want to say week and a half, I've been researching for this. So I have a lot of notes and things. At the Dine College with a staff writer with Indian Country Today, Sainte-Marie said, I found out 10 years later in the 1980s that President Lyndon B. Johnson had been writing letters on White House stationery praising radio stations for suppressing my music. And in the 1970s, not only was the protest movement put out of business, but the Native American movement was attacked. As a result of being blacklisted, which Sainte-Marie claims was led by President Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and Nashville disc jockey Ralph Emery, following the release of I'm Gonna Be a Country Girl Again, Sainte-Marie said, I was put out of business in the United States. Which, she was very vocal with her protest. She had been very clear that she, supported Native American rights and Indigenous rights here in North America of the Indigenous people. And, being very much against the imperialistic ideals and values of mainstream Canadian American media and, just what was being pushed out. She has also, been very vocal about her support for the appeal of the doctrine of discovery.
Indigenous Peoples Day, it's a huge concept. The way I think of it in two ways. One is, how do we handle the hard information that we must know about? And the other is, what can we provide to offset that information as we try and fix things? The most important missing element, I think, in world understanding of Indigenous people has to do with the fact that Indigenous people in this world suffer from a handicap that others don't have to face. And it has to do with the doctrine of discovery, which is a 15th century papal bull. Think of it as a bulletin from the Pope saying what God really wants. And what this thing says, the doctrine of discovery, it says that explorers coming from inhabited lands were instructed by the Pope to invade, capture, and subdue the inhabitants, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to appropriate to himself and his successors all of their lands, kingdoms, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his use and profit. And please don't say, oh, this is over, that's the 15th century, because it's still on the books in US law, Canadian law today. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg used it to defeat the Oneida tribe in 2005. So the doctrine of discovery is still a real living reality in the lives of Indigenous people throughout the world that has been colonized. And, the Pope recently went to Edmonton, Canada. A lot of my relatives were there to see him. A lot of people turned out. And everybody was, raising fists against the Pope and the Catholic Church for the doctrine of discovery. But that's really aiming at the wrong target, because the church has already done away with it. They're not continuing to do that kind of invasion thing. There aren't any more countries left, I guess, to invade. But what really needs to be done is people who are interested in this, instead of yelling at the church, we need to expunge it from the legal systems of each and every country where it still exists throughout the colonial world.
Sainte-Marie also founded Cradleboard Teaching Project in October 1996 using funds from her Neowan Foundation and with a 2-year grant from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation of Battle Creek, Michigan, with projects across Mohawk, Cree, Ojibwe. Excuse me for any of my mixed pronunciations again and again. I am not from any of these nations. The Menominee, Navajo, Quinault, Hawaiian, and Apache communities in 11 states partnered with a non-native class of the same grade level for elementary, middle, and high school grades in the disciplines of geography, history, music, science, social studies, and produced a multimedia curriculum, CD Science Through Native American Eyes. In 2000, Marie gave the commencement address at the Haskell Indian Nations University in 2002. She sang at the Kennedy Space Center for Commander John Harrington, USN, a Chickasaw, and the first Native American astronaut in 2003. Also in 2003, she became a spokesperson for the UNE SCO Associated Schools Project Network in Canada. In 2002, a track written and performed by Sainte-Marie titled Lazarus was sampled by hip-hop producer Kanye West and performed by Cameron and Jim Jones of the Diplomats. The track is called Dead or Alive. And in June 2007, she made a rare U.S. appearance at the Clearwater Festival in Croatoan, Hudson, New York. Like I mentioned earlier, her career basically was killed because of, everything going on here in America. She didn't have a career here in America because of the blacklisting from American U.S. Radio stations, and because of what the U.S. government was doing and all those officials in power. Okay, with all that being said, I had kind of sat here for a few minutes, kept referencing her music career as, a musical activist and everything. So I just wanted to take a minute and talk about that. Because now that you know who she is, I think it's important that we take a look at her accomplishments, especially when it comes down to her mark on the history of the music entertainment industry. Buffy Sainte-Marie first gained popularity as a part of the Greenwich Village's early to mid 60s folk scene alongside artists Neil Young, Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, and Joni Mitchell. Oh, shoot. Folk music is traditionally known for protesting and calling out mainstream ideals and values, but even with all that being said, Buffy Sainte-Marie's music was pretty radical. I vibe with a lot of things she put out. I just love Indigenous women, expressing themselves and, really speaking out for what they believe in. And Buffy Sainte-Marie has done that. She has been consistent with her beliefs. She has been consistent with her music. She's been very consistent amongst her career as an activist. So, I support everything that she does when it comes down to her musical activism and her music career, and just her as an artist and an Indigenous woman. But, like I said, her music was radical. Her music talked about things from drug addiction to imperialistic propaganda. But most notably, her music frequently and consistently talked about Indigenous and Native issues like Native genocide and anti-Native racism. In 1969, Buffy made one of the world's first electronic vocal albums. It was one of the first albums with processed vocals, as well as one of the first albums recorded using quadraphonic technology. So, just an innovative icon, especially when it comes down to her music career. I do think that she has not only has she made an impact when it comes down to activism amongst Indigenous people, but especially when it comes down to, music. Some of my favorite some of my favorite Indigenous artists, sorry, a lot of freaking words that start with the A today. A lot of them talk, especially when, I'm not going to name any today because I actually just might end up making a few episodes about some of my favorite Native artists. But a lot of them they make music about they make protest songs, especially when it comes down to Native rights here in North America. So I do think that she is responsible for that. And like I mentioned earlier, she's very much for the appeal of the doctrine of discovery because of what it represents. And let's just be real, the doctrine of discovery is Native genocide on paper. It's literally basically the permission that is given. And yeah, I appeal that shit. Fuck that shit. Down with the crown. I'm not down with any of that shit. With all that being said, thank you so much for, listening to this episode. I do know it was kind of short compared to my last couple of episodes that I've put out. But I have been kind of putting in a lot of extra work into another episode that I am working on right now, as well as, like I've mentioned in the last few episodes, I've been working on trying to get guests on here. First and foremost, I do want to have Native people on here. Native people, whether from, Native people from Mexico, Native people from Canada, Native people from America, Native people from, other continents. I'm just here for Indigenous people, and I want to have an Indigenous person on my podcast as a guest. Also, I have been making a lot of strides with my own activism, especially when it comes down to hosting safe spaces. I am going to be pushing my break a little bit further, and I will not be returning to the Hetway Hutya safe space community until May, which is my birthday. My birthday month. Because one, I do want to get some things in order for that. I want to make it a bit more organized. Have a consistent release date, because I was just releasing whenever I could, because I am very busy. Like I said, I have a lot of stuff that goes on. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I am thinking about doing more episodes, and more episodes means longer episodes. And if I could have guests on, or even, I wanted to get maybe guest co-host, have one on every other episode, then I could have longer episodes, because I'll be able to sit there and bounce off from people with, my ideas, and we'll keep each other in line when it comes to the episode, because I can go a little bit off course. There's already multiple things edited out of this episode that, it was just unnecessary to add. There was a lot of, when I was doing my research on Buffy, a lot of her marriage history kept coming up, and personally, I just didn't feel that was necessary information. Like, I do not need to be talking about any of her marriages, especially because it seems like a lot of it that kept coming up was like abuse and stuff. So I just didn't feel like it was even necessary to, bring up. So, for anybody who has, especially, victims of domestic violence and abuse, I just didn't really want, it was unnecessary, and I didn't want to trigger them, and it was pretty triggering for me to even sit there and read some of the stuff that was coming up, especially, these were articles, they were getting quite in-depth, which this episode didn't get as in-depth into her life as, maybe others would have liked, but this is what it is, and I am very much proud of, the research I did and everything else. The next episode I will be doing, if it's not the next episode, it'll be the next episode afterwards. So the next episode, I don't know. It'll be released soon. All I know is, I'm working on an episode on the culture appropriation of indigenous cultures, where I'll be speaking about not only the appropriation of Native American cultures, but Mexican indigenous cultures, Native Canadian cultures, indigenous cultures from Africa. I've also seen some people talk about, Irish indigenous cultures being appropriated, especially certain gods and things like that. So, maybe I'll talk about that. I am doing the research, and I haven't actually recorded it yet. I'm not sure when the episode will be released, but it'll probably be released after this one, most certainly. And if not after this one, then it will be released after the next one. So, with all that being said, if you like this episode, please go ahead, like, comment, and share. Please follow my Twitter page at Huscasman and please go ahead and follow the official podcast Twitter page at TCNPod, capital TCNP, lowercase OD. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.